Richard Armitage, you know? Do you guys remember when George Lucas decided to mess with one of the greatest trilogies of all time by making 3 prequels which employed mediocre actors, a thin plot, bad writing, crappy dialogue, and an overuse of CGI? Do you guys remember anyone liking those? Yeah, neither do I. I remember the Star Wars prequels being travesties. Not only to the name of Star Wars, but to cinema and filmmaking as a whole. But for some reason, despite having a template of what not to do, Peter Jackson decided he was going to go right ahead and do the exact same thing to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And Jackson did it all under the guise of adapting another classic work from Tolkien's Legendarium. The key difference was, George Lucas funded the prequels all by himself, which meant that he could do pretty much whatever the hell he wanted to do with them. And he clearly did. Peter Jackson, on the other hand, convinced someone else to give him money and then used that money to utterly destroy a classic of children's literature. Now, The Hobbit isn't bad per se, it's just not great. Especially when put up against its predecessors in the fantastic films that the Lord of the Rings trilogy was. Peter Jackson overuses CGI, and the plot of The Hobbit, which is fairly simple, gets stretched really thin very, very quickly in this movie. On top of that, we really didn't need the tenuous subplots which only vaguely set up the events of the Lord of the Rings. Really, we only needed one scene to set up the Lord of the Rings. A scene with Bilbo in the cave with Gollum, just like it is in the book. Everything else about this movie that doesn't have to do with Bilbo and the dwarves really just seems to serve the purpose of padding out the runtime and making the movie longer than it absolutely needs to be, and really none of it's quite necessary to the main plot of the story. Now, to be fair, there are some things I did like about this movie, and to be perfectly honest, and it might sound weird, one of the things I did like about this movie is also something I didn't like about this movie. First of all, I loved all the actors in this movie. It's always nice to see Ian McKellen as Gandalf, and Martin Freeman as Bilbo is a perfect casting choice. And Richard Armitage as Thorin Oakenshield really steals the show. Now, I love everything that Richard is in, especially the 2006-2007 BBC version of Robin Hood, but here he really seems to shine. As if he was made specifically to play the character of Thorin Oakenshield, or if Thorin Oakenshield was written so he could play him. Secondly, and this is the weird one, I like everything having to do with the lore of Middle-earth. I just don't think it was right for this particular movie. It bogs down the main plot of the film, and it really only seems to serve the purpose, aside from padding out the runtime, of bringing back as many old faces from Lord of the Rings as is possible. And while it's nice to see Christopher Lee in anything, and especially to see him as Sauron again, it's really not necessary for this movie. That being said, I do like anything that brings me farther into the world building of any one particular fantasy world. All in all, this movie isn't necessarily bad, it just never lives up to the epic grandeur of its predecessors. And at times it gets oafish and cartoony. Not as much as its successors, but enough that it got on my nerves pretty quickly. Especially during the scene in the beginning where the dwarves start singing a jaunty sea shanty or whatever, trying to recruit Bilbo by cleaning his house and throwing his crap all over the place. That wasn't funny, it wasn't amusing, it was dumb, and that scene should not have been in this movie. The scene took me out of the movie and was just dumb and annoying. I give this movie 2 out of 4 bad prequel trilogies. It's not quite bad, but it never quite gets there. That's all for this one, guys. Next up, we're going to be reviewing The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. Until then, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Go check out our Facebook page, which is up and running, link below. My Instagram page, where I just take pictures of my movies, also linked below. And always remember, guys, Taylor Swift doesn't care about you.